Well, welcome everybody to Run, Walk, Talk, Tales of Inclusion and Development. I'm Judy and my pronouns are she and her. And I'm here with Steph and her pronouns are she and her. And today we are joined by Nita Agustin, the Spunky Counsellor, I love that, who will be speaking to us about creative spaces for queer folks. Welcome, Nita.
Thank you, Judy.
So happy you could join us today, Nita. So I'm going to share a little bit about you and your bio. So just for all of our listeners, Nita is an LGBT therapist based in Burnaby, BC, and they are ready to help find yourself on this journey called life. Nita grew up queer in Indonesia and made the move to Canada in 2011. And this experience has framed a lot of how Nita views the world and has given her valuable insight on navigating the LGBTQIA2S plus issues, cross-cultural changes, life transitions, and finding yourself. And just so everyone knows, Nita and I met at a conference earlier on this year at the Bigger Ideas Conference. And so I'm really looking forward to having this conversation with you today. Big welcome. Thank you for being here.
I'm very excited about this conversation too, and I think we might as well dive in and curious to know, what does a safe space look like for queer individuals? What does it look like? What does it feel like? And I think for a lot of us, it would be good to know how can we create these environments.
Yeah, it was actually super helpful. I just want to put this response was like actually having this list of questions you provided yesterday because I've been munching on it for this past 24 hours. And whenever we think about space, space is something physical as well as emotional. Like space is, like if you're coming into my space, for example, at my home, then there is the furniture, like the physical aspect of it, and there's also how you feel around me. And it actually reminds me of me being in different spaces in my life where I feel safe and not safe. And for example, there are certain places where they would put intentionally put like pride or trans flags or like different stickers and stuff that signifies that hey, like there's representation, like like you're welcome here. And to some folks, it might feel like it's a warm, welcoming space to see that. And even for me, like yeah, like I do feel that those kind of indicators kind of like signals, hey, like you're welcome here, though I would always like to take it up a notch to like, hey, how are you welcoming me? How are you treating me in this space? And I feel that it speaks like action speaks louder than words in those instances.
That's a really great example. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
Well, and it brings to mind too, I think, when you can have the symbol and that's important, but then as you're saying, the experience has to match the symbol that you're showing. Like you need to make sure that you're following through on providing a safe space.
Yes, exactly. Because they like I've been in workplace situations where I do see those outward symbol,
Hmm.
though the way I was treated, the I don't want to jump too ahead. The one of the questions you were asking was about inclusive language, and there's just not much inclusivity itself. Like if there is someone misgendering me or mispronouncing my name and stuff, like there's not much consideration. So like to me, it's like okay, like it's more like performative or like a lip service.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Nita. Yeah. And then, so another sort of the second question here is around kind of how can organizations really actively address and prevent microaggressions or discriminations against queer people in these workspaces? I feel like besides the usual sort of respectful workplace and things like that, right?
Yeah, I think, and this is actually, it reminds me, I've done my homework actually, and I listened to a few of your prior episodes, and I really, really like what you shared in, I forgot what episode it was where you were sharing doing DI. It always starts with getting a bit of a temperature of where you're at right now. because
Yeah.
a lot of times when we talk about preventing, like what are you preventing and how does microaggression actually looks like? Because at the school where I was trained to be a counselor, one time there was a student who shared about like, oh yeah, I feel uncomfortable like living in my neighborhood right now because there's like a bunch of brown people moving into my neighborhood. And this person is a registered clinical counselor now. And I've been like in reflecting about these questions, it reminds me of that incident actually. Like, how can we prevent that from happening? Because to prevent that from happening, then it's important to have, like different rules and standards in the hiring process. But if it's someone who is already in the system itself, then it's more so engaging in open channel communication. But then once again, whenever we talk about communication, there's always two sides to the story. Like where are they at, and are they even open to learning?
So,
Well, and that's a big one. Like, are people open to learning? And I think if people are, um, and thinking about, you were saying we're going to be coming to it, we're coming to it now, like thinking about, inclusive language and representation and what role it plays in safe spaces. And to your last example, like how can you address if somebody says something and you want to say something, you also you maybe want to assume some positive intent, but you're not sure if you should be assuming positive intent. Like, what can people do to be mindful of the language that they're using generally, but also if they need to make a statement or say something to somebody?
Two things come to mind for this. One is definitely, once again, in terms of communication, where are they at and are they open to learning? Because I personally, as a queer person, I don't expect for us to just get there. Like, we exist in a system and we've been conditioned to live life, to say things and to behave a certain way. And whenever we talk about DEI and inclusivity, it is a new term. It is a new territory for us. It is a new practice. And whenever we need to adopt something new, we need to check out the old part. But checking out the old part, we need to unlearn that.
unlearning part is that interesting piece, right? That I think we need to kind of really talk a lot more about, because I think sometimes I think it's just this is just what we need to do, but we actually probably need to do more unpacking instead of just doing this one thing, whatever that is, right?
Exactly, because I've been attending this weekly mentorship call that Transcare BC hosted every Thursday. And one of the webinars was about this topic, actually, implementing DEI and inclusivity in the workplace. Because I think that's where the importance of dialogue, because otherwise it almost seems like my people are imposing this practice to
Right.
non-queer people. And that's
Right.
where, to me, it's like it's important for us to have a bit of a dialogue, because otherwise it's like, okay, like my pronouns are she, they, for example, and then they kept on or they, she, for example. If I say like, oh yeah, my pronouns is they, them, but you're a woman, so like we need to have more of a conversation, and the
Right.
other person needs to be open to learning, because otherwise it almost seems like going back to like imposing. Like, is it really also the job of queer person like myself to have to educate the public, to have to like done all of the labor? Like, we need
That's
to
right.
come together. Like,
Right.
I'm open to sharing, and at the same time I need you to do your work and to catch up on the gap here.
Right. Right. And build that relationship, right? That it's do your homework and build that relationship with you as a person.
Exactly. Because like
Yeah.
a lot of times I see the tendency in DEI work is like, okay, let's just like we need to have certain quotas of like queer and certain characteristics or like conditions, basically. So like, yeah, let's just hire. But then like it almost become tokenism then.
Yeah.
And I felt like I got the hunch that I was hired once in a local community agency just as a token, because they need queer representation. That was something that was always highlighted during the hiring process. But then when it comes to like doing the work, I felt that whenever I try to engage management in discussion, it was just like not welcome. So it's just like there's some disconnection here. There's like a bit of a misalignment because you brought me in because you want someone with lived experience as a queer person. You want to have more awareness, blah, 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 which I'm like, yeah, that's what I bring in. Though when I give suggestion, that management's like, yeah, very lukewarm. So I'm like, okay.
Right.
Did you
Well,
really want it? Like, here I
Exactly.
am.
Yeah.
that's right.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
right. And I
yeah.
think Nita, you've sort of touched a little bit upon this, but like, how can we really ensure that queer voices and perspectives are really meaningfully included in policies and programs?
Ooh, this could be a bit of a dialogue because actually, Steph, you're in this work actually as well. I'm wondering if, in terms of like whatever policy that has been created now that are existing, it's archaic. It's like it's something that has existed for a long time, and it was created. I feel like a lot of times rules and laws and regulations are a snapshot of a certain timeline, like time period
Yeah.
it was created
Yes.
in.
Yeah.
So if we were to include my voices, for example, then we need to include people with lived experience to sit on the table
Yeah.
alongside people who are in charge.
Yeah.
Because like, yeah, like I am aware of this like inequality of power, inequality of access and stuff. And sometimes the discussion is like, oh yeah, let's just not include people of certain races, like the white supremacy, for example. Like, oh yeah, like, I don't want to be in touch with white people, but I'm like, to me, like, no, the problem is not that, like, how can like it's a systemic, like we exist in a system and we are a product of the system, and whatever things that has existed in the workplace, it has been existing for a while. So for us to make
Yeah.
changes, we actually need to have communication and dialogue, and to sit at the table together having discussions, open channel communication.
Yeah. And I think, one of the issues, unfortunately, that I've seen is sometimes I think people look at updating policies, potentially, just talking about policies. It's a bit of a, this is our annual check box. We have a week to do it. And do we need to include queer voices? And the, of course, the sort of the answer is, of course we do. But then when queer folk bring up sort of topics to sort of say, hey, these words are triggering, or this is an issue we've run into, can we put this in the policy? It means it's not going to be done in a week. It might now have to take a month. And we need to be able to give that space and time to have that extra few weeks, because it's not an arbitrary, let's throw a date to get it done by November 1, right?
Exactly, because that was pretty much, I mean, my personal experience was not necessarily specifically about policy, it was about other things. So like, I think the intention is there, though, like you said, do we just tick out the check boxes, or we want to create something more in, like, like that is long term? Because whenever we talk about something that is longer term, it requires time. The same way that once you get into accident, like you don't get the healing like within a day or within a week, right? And that's the same here. Like there's been wounding, there's been injuries, there's been fractured happening. Like, of course, not physical, but like, so yeah, I agree with you. Like, because that's also echoing what I've seen that in practice a lot.
Well, and I think that leads nicely into the next question, which is how can allies be educated and empowered to contribute to building safe and supportive environments? And it sounds like one of it is giving room to have that dialogue and not putting these timelines like we have in the workplace, these really finite timelines. We can give some space to it. But what would you say are some ways that as allies we can ensure that our workplaces are supportive?
Ooh, this actually reminds me of my conversation with Autumn. She's a fellow clinical counselor who's also a play therapist. Because we were talking about actually this topic, like inclusivity, diversity in the counseling space, because counseling is a very white profession. Like I personally, as someone of color, queer, I don't see too many people like myself represented. That's why I feel like I'm a bit of a unicorn. And Autumn was commenting that, yeah, like we really lament the fact that it's always the same people with the same voices, the same messages that gets the platform. So to a certain extent, like, yeah, like it is safe to say that it's certain people of certain level has power, has authority, and has buy-in whenever they say something. And I think this is where like I was wondering if actually exploring the concept of partnership comes into play to actually make changes.
Mm-hmm.
Like for people like me to come alongside people like you, people where you have platform, you have voices, you have your crowd, as more of a bridge. Because it's not about us against them.
That is such a great point, because I think with a lot of this work and stuff, it's very easy to become an us versus them, very
Exactly.
binary, which really, because that's sort of how our minds work, right? To want to make it very binary, and it's not.
Yeah, yeah, I
Yeah,
totally see that.
yeah,
Your face light up when I said us against them. So it seems like you really, really resonated. That really hits home
yeah,
for you.
yeah, yeah. Nita, we're coming up to the end. And so, one of the things that we like to ask our guests is, are you reading any books, listening to any podcasts? What can you sort of share with our listeners?
Yeah, I would say that for the most part, my brain is still butchered post my master's training. So I haven't been reading any psychological book, though I started dabbling into like communication and business and such. So I am actually currently reading Known. It's a book by, oh shoot, I can't find the book near me. It's
That's
a book
okay.
about personal branding, basically. It's
Oh,
known
okay.
by, I think, Mark Schaefer, if I'm not like mistaken.
Okay.
And for podcast, I have keen interest on money and finances, so I've been listening a lot to Canadian Investor.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if any
Great.
of you folks here like have heard about that. To me, it's a really nice break from like doing deep, deep work.
Yes.
So yeah, maybe check it out, and I welcome you to contact me at the Spunky Counselor if there's anything you have in mind about those book or the podcast. Happy to chat.
Oh, I love
That's
it. And we
great.
will post your link to your website when we post the podcast. And I just really want to thank you for appearing on our podcast. So many takeaways. And I really think what you mentioned about as allies building bridges and providing platforms and giving
Hmm.
opportunities, like I'm really taking that away as a practical step that I can do to really be inviting voice and
Yeah.
you know, letting people take the stage. It doesn't, or partnering together to take the stage as a real ally, maybe presenting together, or I can introduce somebody, or it's it gives me some really practical things to think about, which I think is a wonderful takeaway. So I'm very excited. So thank you everybody for joining us. Until next time.